All right, up next we have Ami Vitale. Amy is a National Geographic photographer and filmmaker, as well as a writer and an intrepid explorer. She is going to share with us some stories from around the world, and around the world she certainly has been. She's traveled to more than 100 countries, bearing witness not only to some violence and conflict at times, but also to the surreal beauty and enduring power of the human spirit to be found on this planet. She has lived everywhere from mud huts and war zones. She's even contracted malaria in her adventures. She's donned a panda suit. We'll have to ask about that. And keeping true to her belief in the importance of living the story, she's sure to put herself out there in lots of different kinds of situations. She'll share with us some of the personal stories and individuals who, against all odds, have changed their destiny and the destiny of the wildlife with whom they coexist. She would like to remind us that we are part of a complex world created over millions of years, and that the survival of all species is intertwined with our own. So excited for Amy to be here with us today. I'll go ahead and hand it off to you, Amy, and please everybody put questions into the chat and we'll be sure to get to.
Hi, thank you, Kate. Let me just share my screen here and jump into the presentation. So I'm so grateful that you all are tuning in, and I decided today to really make this more of the personal journey, because I feel like so often we all have these, we all have these strengths that we often don't even realize, and we're not even aware of those. And if we don't look for it, all those strengths kind of remain untapped and unknown. And so I've titled today, discovering your hidden strengths. And it actually brings up this question for me, hidden from who? Because we usually don't see our own strengths. And that's part of the challenge, So sometimes it's really as simple as sitting down with somebody that knows you well and just asking them, what do you see as my strengths? And I realized that sometimes we don't set out to look for our hidden strengths, but in my case, it took a journey to figure out what those were. And so I want to share some of my journey and what I discovered. And I don't mean to imply that I, set out to uncover them, but as I reflect back, I can recognize those events now, those steps and often missteps that I took that led me to discover my own strengths. And, for many of us, we lose our parents when we're older, and it puts the world and life into perspective. And that happened for me when I was 7. Following a really traumatic death of my father, I became incredibly isolated, solitary, and introverted. And it was a hard time, and it kind of stuck with me for many, many years. I mean, actually my whole life. But I came to realize that even in the shadow of death, life does go on. And looking back, I've come to realize that that profound loss helped me to recognize the resilience of life. And it really did make me who I am. And it also made me realize that events that appear to be the source of our traumas and struggles can also be the foundation of our strengths. So after my father died, I felt as if there was nothing that I could hold on to, that life felt really ephemeral. His death kind of numbed me to the world. But the second I picked up a camera, as I got a little bit older, I realized that looking through that lens, I saw this world of both beauty and heartbreak, a world full of meaning. And taking pictures allowed me to capture and hold on to those beautiful but fleeting moments. I'm so sorry, I just lost somebody close to me yesterday, so this is hard. But I just wanted to say that the camera really became my tool. that allowed me to reconnect to the world and have meaningful relationships. And I had struggled to feel at ease in social situations, but I did feel comfortable behind the camera. That little black box gave me incredible courage. And I, in the beginning, realized that the camera was this tool that empowered me. But what I never imagined as I started to get into photography that the camera became this tool that allowed me to amplify other people's voices. And that's what this is about, really. It is not about us. And it became this really amazing tool to share these stories and create awareness and understanding, and help me understand this world we live in. But I want to back up because I didn't become a photographer right away. I began my career as an editor. I dreamed of being a photographer, but the people hiring couldn't envision me as anything more than an editor. I was a young woman when I began, and the folks taking the shots were mainly men, with a few remarkable exceptions. And in each of the jobs I had in the beginning, there was sexism and hazing and harassment. I was definitely pigeonholed and felt stuck for a long time. But I always had that dream. I was aware that there was this ladder to climb, and the obvious path made available to me didn't include being a photographer. And I remember showing my photographic work to supervisors and editors with the dream of one day becoming a photojournalist. But those dreams were really dismissed in the beginning. And so even though it was terrifying to quit my job as an editor that was stable and really fulfilling in some ways, I knew I had to try. That even if I failed, this was part of my journey, and I would never regret trying. So having that courage helped me realize, that I had to go and make some mistakes, fall on my face, but get out and go. So the first thing I did was I built up the courage to quit that first job and pursue my dream. And I moved to Eastern Europe. This is actually in Hungary, but I ended up getting a job for a small business paper in the Czech Republic. And a year later, I began to hear stories of this conflict brewing in our backyard. The war in Kosovo was beginning. And suddenly I went from being this relatively amateur photographer, mainly taking pictures of like businessmen and politicians, to overnight becoming a conflict photographer without really meaning to. But leaving that first job taught me to never be pinned down again, that I always had to follow my heart. And the hardest job was to leave that first one. And after that, I realized I had this strength. And the strength was not to ever settle and not to live to society's priorities. And so one of the lessons here is to just, always dream of that journey. Don't dream of the end point, and never give up on a single aspect of your dream. Take the journey, enjoy the ride, even the struggles. And I set down this path and began kind of covering conflicts for the first decade of my career, and went, kind of to all corners, the worst horrors of the world. I went and, I spent, this is in Kashmir, 4 years living there, telling that long pending conflict between India and Pakistan. And this was one of the pictures I was also sent to, in the very beginning, to cover the second Intifada. And my editors told me to get close to the action, bring back the most dramatic images. And I did that. And on this one square block in this image, there were probably a dozen photographers all photographing the scene unfolding. And, I I would say this was a big turning point in my career because, I stopped to ask myself, were there other things that I should be covering? The things that allow us to relate to one another as human beings. And one day I heard music coming out of this building and wandered up these steps and found this beautiful scene of a couple getting married in the middle of this conflict. And it was a real turning point for me because I realized that, at best, I was covering half the story, and at worst, maybe it was even a lie because I was only presenting the most dramatic images, the violent images, without really showing what humanity looked like. And I'm condensing my life story into 15 minutes, but basically kind of started questioning the pictures I was taking and realized 10 years later that all these stories about conflict, started to make me realize that they were all actually stories about our planet too, our resources. Every conflict was always about resources and the environment. And I realized conflict after conflict, that all these pictures of people and poverty and whatever the story was that I was asked to tell, that they were always stories about nature and wildlife too. And so everything is connected. And I realized that I needed to start telling the stories about our natural world. They're one and the same. You can't separate stories of humanity from stories of our planet. And even in my backyard, I live in Montana now, I start to see that connection and how important it is to tell those stories too. But a big kind of turning point for me was in 2009, I heard about this plan to move 4 northern white rhino from a zoo, the Dvor Králové Zoo in the Czech Republic, back to Kenya in this last-ditch effort to save the whole species. And, I think that was this huge wake-up call to me. I saw these gentle, hulking, ancient creatures. I mean, you look at them and you can understand how they've been roaming the planet for millions of years. And on that day, there were just 8 of them left. 8, all in zoos. And I pitched this story, and I just want to tell this piece of the story as well. Don't stop if you get rejected. Every single editor that I pitched this story turned me down. And so I wrote them all again and said, what is the problem with the story? And they said, the problem is it's not visual enough. This is a great story for radio. But they couldn't envision what I was seeing. And so that was one really good lesson for me. I think when all of us go and want to be storytellers or, whatever your dream is, that message of being resilient keeps circling back. Get a thick skin, circle back to them, ask them why it's not working for them. And I realized pretty quickly that I needed to do a better job of illustrating the sense of urgency of this story, why it mattered now, why anybody in the world should care about it. And also, as a photographer, I had to explain what the visuals would be. Because in their mind, they could only see kind of, pictures of a zoo, animals in these crates. They couldn't envision the story. So sometimes you have to actually articulate why a story is also going to be visual. And, this is how people imagine rhinos, roaming the open plains of Africa. But this is what it looks like. They are being poached to extinction because the value of their horn is worth so much. And they have to be guarded 24/7 around the clock because they're their numbers are, I mean, it's shocking how close to extinction so many species are, not just these charismatic species, frankly, elephants and even the less charismatic species that we don't even talk about. And we are going through the sixth mass extinction right now, which is purely human driven. And I started to investigate this story, gosh, now 11 or 12 years ago, and realized that it was always being framed in this way that we've got to militarize it, we've got to kill the poachers. And there was this heavy emphasis on militarization. And even today, I think about how we frame these narratives, even when we want to take it to like the gender imbalance. And there's like the stories of, well, let's arm the women and create a whole brigade of women, anti-poaching units. And in my head, I was thinking, that's not the big question. The question is, indigenous people, the people living with the wildlife, what do they think? To me, their story was always being left out 11 years ago. I never saw stories about people living with the wildlife and what they thought. And this is Yusuf with a different species of rhino sleeping with 3 baby black rhinos. And it turns out there are people and communities who are aware of this crisis and protecting the wildlife and their habitats and working so hard, with very little resources, very little political power. And, it's that Margaret Mead quote again, that a group of individuals can change the world. That's all that ever has. And it's true. And I've sort of been able to witness these remarkable stories. And I kind of set out to find not just the challenges and the, distressing things that make us, not be able to sleep at night. And then you realize that there are solutions, and we just need to be shining a light and amplifying some of these incredible people and the work that they're doing. And I'm sure you're going to hear from so many of these incredible people today. There's, really hopeful stories out there. And I don't mean to be Pollyannish about this. I understand the challenges, but I do think that we need to give a much more balanced view of what this world really looks like. And, give people, the stories that make them want to wake up and get out of bed and go and do something. And so now I just want to kind of end by circling back to the northern white rhino story, where I have been staying in touch with them for 11 years now, and kind of trying to tell the story of what's happening to them as an example of what's happening to so many other species. And back in 2018, my friends at Old Pejeta Wildlife Conservancy, where these rhinos were sent, they called and said, you have to hurry and get back here, because Sudan, who was the last male northern white rhino, was about to pass away. And by that time, he had become basically an international celebrity. I mean, Tinder had his picture on it. People were traveling just to see this ancient, beautiful creature. And when I arrived, the thing that struck me about this moment was how quiet it was. You could only hear the sound of the rain and the gentle, kind of muffled sobs of the keepers trying to hold in their tears, and then one go-away bird screaming. And it was the most haunting moment. And I think that this image became so, it just spread around the world, because I think it illustrates so well our relationship with the wild in many ways. It's like, what do we want to be? Do we want to be the greatest protectors, or the ones that destroyed this planet? And to me, this picture is so heartbreaking, because it is so symbolic of our own demise. I just feel like if we don't start seeing ourselves as a part of the landscape, as deeply connected to every living creature, we're actually witnessing our own demise. And I just want to kind of wrap my talk up with this beautiful kind of twist of fate. The story of documenting extinction has actually turned into a story about much more than that. And there's a group of scientists, it's called the Biorescue Project. It's this international consortium, and they are trying to rescue the last two rhinos, and using science, they are collecting all of the immature eggs. They call them oocytes, and they've created already 5 healthy embryos. They've identified southern white rhinos, which will become the host. And they're, you know, really hoping to use a combination of stem cell and using these embryos to bring this species back from extinction, which is, you know, horrible that we've come to this. But at the same time, I have to commend them and the work that they're doing. And this is Thomas Hildebrandt and his team. And it's sad that we have to get to science. And I think whether or not they save this animal from extinction, we don't know, but I think the science is very valuable for other species as well. So I just want to wrap up this talk and kind of end on the note that, there are all of these beautiful stories and heartbreaking stories. And I called it Discovering Your Hidden Strengths, because it is so much about our inner resilience. Everything we do, it's like also our attitude. How are we going to approach the next, the next things we have to do on this planet? And we are intricately connected to one another on this beautiful shared life raft. And so I just want to end with asking that question. It's in our hands. What are you going to do about it? And all of our voices do matter. I think we realize that more and more now than we ever did. And I think that is the big question for me, is like, every voice does matter. And part of it is just having the confidence to believe in your voice. And not enough of us are actively engaged right now in being a voice for all of this, our planet, the wildlife, and for each other. And yeah, I think I'll end it there and let us go to Q&A. But please, you're welcome to take a screenshot and get in touch with me. I actually don't use Facebook anymore, but the best way to get in touch with me is through email, which is just amy@amivitale.com. So I'm going to end it, and thank you. And we can open it up to Q&A now.
Amy, thank you so much for such a moving presentation. People are writing in the comments how much they appreciate your openness and your honesty. And I think sometimes it's easy when we're watching presentations from people who have accomplished so much to just think, wow, that just happens for them. And how come I'm not able to do that? But behind the scenes, everybody's dealing with failures and missteps, as you so aptly called them. And so to really bring people in, understanding that we all struggle with failing sometimes and going through these difficult emotions, and the important work is persevering and getting through them. And that really comes out in your photographs. There's so much to say about all of it, and the way that conflict is portrayed in the media, and violence is often romanticized and glamorized. So for you to really bring the humanity and those tender and vulnerable moments forward, and people trying to connect with one another and the species around them despite everything, is just really an extraordinary accomplishment. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you for that wonderful summary. And I guess the other thing I just wanted to say is sort of focusing on developing every skill that you can. And I think as women, there was this, since we're talking about women in this week, somebody just, that quote, Lord, give me the strength of one mediocre white male. I no, I shouldn't bring this in. Sorry, but there's that. Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to bring that.
That's the meme going around. I'm sure everyone's seen it on their social media.
But right. So I just say that because so much of it is about our confidence. And I bring that up because it honestly took so long for me to kind of find that confidence to go and believe that I could try learning new skills. And, so just keep pushing yourselves and believe that you can, if your dream is to become a filmmaker, whatever it may be, it seems insurmountable when you're starting out, but everything's possible.
And that's so important to keep in mind. I think, yes, there is definitely that tendency to kind of hang back and want to know exactly how to do it, but there's so much value in the learning by just going out and doing it. Has that process changed or gotten more familiar for you as you've gone on from that first moment of taking that leap into the unknown?
Yeah, I think so much of that is just taking that first step and understanding that you will fail at stuff. It's just part of it, and that's okay. Just know that you're going to learn from all of those failures. I don't even like that word really, because yeah, we all make mistakes, and it's just sort of getting back up and, keep on dancing until, trying the next thing. But it does get a little bit easier each time. I think you just start realizing how, I think just finding the things that make your heart beat and make you excited. And that's the hardest thing, is sort of figuring out what you're passionate about. And then once you've got that figured out, then it's all a little bit easier, I think.
And we have a couple of questions from the chat, but first I'll ask you, I'm curious with quarantine and us all being hemmed in more than we're used to, not being able to go off to these far-flung places. Are you still able to get out into your own community? And if so, do you bring that sense of having new lenses on the world and looking at things in curious ways and not taking things for granted that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been this wonderful, another kind of wake-up call for me to just slow down, even though we're not, I feel like that this time has been a lot of spinning wheels, like making lots of pitches, handling a lot of rejection, but knowing never to give up, because there are these small little triumphs. I was able, in this time, I finished a short film that I'm about to release, and definitely focused on things happening in my backyard here in Montana. And so trying to get a few projects going. But I'm still really cognizant, and I don't think we can go back and work in the same ways. I have been going back for that biorescue project. I had to go back to Kenya twice for that during this past year, and just taking, a lot of precautions and getting tested quite a bit, and just being really, just trying to keep the distance. But yeah, I think it's definitely also made me realize that we, in this period, have an obligation not just to focus on ourselves, but try to find ways to lift other people. And so that, I feel like, is the next big transformation in my work. My life's purpose is to try to do much more to help other people when I get opportunities. Just, I think that's been something that's come out of this moment, is that it is part of our responsibility not to make this just about ourselves, and sort of realizing how important that is.
And finding ways to stay connected with one another. I would love for you to share a little bit about the film that you mentioned. And also, someone was wondering if there are any dream places or projects that you haven't yet had a chance to work on that you're looking forward to doing at some point.
Oh, thanks. So the dream projects, I feel like I am doing my dream projects. I've been really it's taken me down these rabbit holes, sort of that first question I brought up about trying to find solutions to these big bigger issues. And then it's gotten me super involved in different communities, particularly in northern Kenya. And then also a project here in Montana that I've literally spent almost a decade on. So I just keep going deeper and deeper into the stories. And then also finding my voice in being an activist. And I'm really, proud to say I've raised like $3 million for that landscape. And this is something I never dreamed that I could do, just as one individual. And I started to realize that that it is part of my responsibility to take this sort of platform I've been given and do everything I can to support those people and institutions working there. Sorry, what was the first part of your question again?
If you could share about the short film that you mentioned.
Yeah, so it's called Shaba, and it's the story about this elephant sanctuary and about the relationship between the women elephant keepers, who are the first women elephant keepers in all of Africa, and this elephant named Shaba, and their relationship to each other and how they lifted each other up, really. And so it's a short film, and now I'm, hoping to get a whole series off the ground. So that's my lifelong dream right there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I'm not sure if you're a part of the upcoming biodiversity festival that will be happening, but that's definitely going to be on the horizon, where people are passionate about learning about the other species on the planet. There are some questions we didn't have a chance to get to, centering around animals and humans' relationship with animals. So hopefully we'll be able to get more into that in the future. Amy, thank you so much for your time and a wonderful presentation and for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I love what you're doing. Thank you.